make sure to give my dad a 5-star review.
Make sure to like and subscribe to his YouTube. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
And they have created an app called Vote Alert, which they are through which they are soliciting complaints or reports of fraud from poll workers, from poll watchers, from voters, from really anyone. So same sort of tactic as Lion of Judah, saying, if you're a poll worker in the field and you see something, tell us about it so that we can, create a database that that kind of collates all this information. One of the other big things I should add about True the Vote is that the Vote Alert app has a partnership with Mike Lindell, who is one of the most prominent and prolific election deniers and conspiracy theorists in the country. Also, in recent months, has been blaring out anti-Semitic Nazi dog whistles as well. But he's endorsed their efforts as well.
Hey, welcome back, faithful politics listeners and viewers. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, I am your political host, Will Wright, and your faithful host is once again not here. He's off doing God stuff, so you're stuck with me. But with me this week, we have with us returning guest, Phoebe Petrovic or Petrovich. Dang it.
Petrovic.
It's Petrovic. All right. She, who is an investigative reporter on a 2-year fellowship with ProPublica's local reporting network. And we are so glad to have her back. So, yeah, thank you. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. Thrilled to be here.
So last time we had you on the show, you were with us talking about Pastor Matthew Trewhella, I believe. Mm-hmm. And he was a pretty influential figure kind of in the GOP circles. He wrote a book called The Doctrine of Lesser Magistrates. And this week you are coming to us with a new story. So maybe you can start us off by telling us a little bit more about it.
Yeah. So for the past few months, I have been looking at the concerted effort from groups that are not the dominant historical political parties, but outside groups who are aligned with Donald Trump in many cases, have been making a really concerted effort to recruit poll workers for the 2024 election, sort of an escalation from previous years and cycles where historically activists, campaigns, advocacy groups have recruited poll watchers to look and observe and raise challenges or flag concerns to their lawyers. This year, they have been really making a push to recruit and hire poll workers to actually physically administer the election. And one of the things that was really interesting to me that is why we pursued this story is a lot of the groups we were looking at have a history of pushing false claims about the election, claiming that it was fraudulent, that it was stolen, that it might be stolen again. And so poll workers had an individual responsibility to get involved and to prevent that from happening or report out concerns if they saw them. So we found like over half a dozen groups. We've featured only a few in the story. But this is something we've seen sort of across the board, targeted into swing states in the country leading up to the election.
Now, you said poll workers, but you also differentiated between poll watchers. Can you just sort of break down kind of the differences between the two?
Totally. And that so people get them confused. Even within the story, people on my own team would get them confused. I had a colleague send me a whole bunch of information about poll watchers. I was like, thank you. Not helpful for the story, unfortunately. So a poll watcher is a volunteer that is typically recruited by an outside group, and they can look, but they can't touch. So what they can do is they are able to watch the process. One of the great things about our elections process in this country is that almost every single part of it is open to the public so that the public can actually see what the officials are doing and raise concerns if they have them. So poll watchers, they show up on the day. It totally varies depending on the state, whether or not they have to register in advance, whether or not they have to be nominated or credentialed, whether or not they can do something called a challenge or raise a challenge to an individual voter. In my state of Wisconsin, poll watchers are able to actually challenged an individual voter's eligibility to vote. So if I went to the polls, a poll watcher with the Republican or Democratic Party, with the League of Women Voters or ACLU, they could say, hey, I have a valid reason that I don't think that Phoebe can vote, and we would have to go through an individual process. But poll watchers cannot touch anything. And in many cases, they're just able to kind of look. Poll workers, on the other hand, are temporary government employees. So these are people who actually are hired by their municipality. It's still normal people like you and I, both of us could apply to become a poll worker. Often you'll see if you go to the polls, it's often people who are retired and have some more time and want to sort of give back to their community and country. But these folks actually help to physically administer the election. So they are the people who are checking in people at the door. They are maybe checking your ID and your address, asking you to say your name, making sure that you actually can sign into the poll book. They are the ones who are giving you the ballot, who are maybe helping you scan it, shutting down the polling place after. So they're like physically doing the stuff of the election. And in 2020, we now know that Trump's team was really, really involved on the ground in places like Detroit, at the absentee ballot vote counting center in Detroit, where there were a ton of challengers, a ton of observers who were getting really concerned. There were so many observers in the room. They were concerned about COVID. They were concerned about people like taking photographs of poll workers and intimidating them. And so officials ended up saying, we're double the capacity. Some of you need to go, and closing the doors and not letting more people in. And that kicked off this gigantic conspiracy where people were claiming that observers did not have a chance to observe, that they weren't able to look, they weren't able to watch what was going on and flag concerns. And so what we found is that this year, lots of the activists have been saying, remember what happened in 2020? You got kicked out because you were a poll watcher. This time around, you need to be a poll worker so that you are actually inside the room if they kick people out and lock the doors and you can see what's going on.
That's so wild. So just to make sure I understand.
Yeah.
Anybody can be a poll watcher, but a poll worker has to apply essentially, like you're getting paid, probably some stipend or something.
Yeah, you're getting paid. It's not much, but it's something. Every state, I think all but maybe 3 states legally require a poll worker to go through training with the municipality or county or whatever that is actually hiring you. So these are trained employees. You know, they have to sit in a room for a couple of hours, up to a day, learn how to do the stuff. Almost every state also has a legal requirement for some amount of partisan parity. So the poll workers typically have to identify themselves as a Republican or a Democrat. And then the rules are such that you don't, there's never, they try to avoid a situation where it's a polling place run by entirely Democrats or entirely Republicans. A lot of the jobs that poll workers have to do are in sort of bipartisan teams of at least 2 to make sure that there are sort of checks and balances in the process all the way through.
So you could legitimately be discriminated against because of your political party. Is that kind of what I'm hearing, even though I don't think probably it's viewed that way?
Well, I don't understand. What do you mean by that? I'm not quite sure.
meaning that if there's an effort to, balance the number of poll workers, with the respective, Democrat, Republican, if they did have nothing but, Democrats or Republicans all applying to become poll workers, like would they have to reduce their staff to, compensate for, I don't know, like people from other different political parties, or like how would they handle that?
So it totally depends based on the jurisdiction. That's one of the great from a security standpoint, difficult from a reporting and communication standpoint. Every jurisdiction does things a little bit differently. But in Wisconsin, for example, they have a rule. So our state statutes say that you need to that the Republican and Democratic parties have the opportunity to nominate poll workers onto their lists. And then the clerk, who staffs polling places in Wisconsin, has a legal obligation to fill up their staffing slots with people from the Republican and Democratic side in sort of as close to equal as they can before they then staff it with their non-affiliates. And so what I've actually heard from clerks is that there are quite a few people who have been doing this for years, I should back up and say that for years, there were parties, depending on the county, that just didn't nominate anyone. That didn't do that. And then if that was the case in Wisconsin, you had the ability to, as a clerk, to hire whoever came through your door, passed your background check or whatever, your vetting process, and did your training. But in recent years, as people have become much more interested in elections, spurred by false claims about voter fraud in some cases, the Republican and Democratic parties have introduced more nominees. In Wisconsin, the state parties say that they have introduced or nominated a record number of poll workers. And the clerks that I spoke to were like, this is great. We want everyone to participate. But I have really experienced people who have been doing this for years and years and years who don't want to affiliate with a party. They don't feel comfortable doing that. They just want to run our elections. And I'm not able to select them because I have a bunch of nominees from the two parties. So what I have heard on the ground is actually more of like I can't get these non-affiliated folks who really know the job and have done it for a long time. But the most important thing about our system, or one of the defining features of our system, in speaking to scholars and lawyers who study this, is that we have what's called an adversarial system of elections. So we have the two parties are really built into the process and take an active role. And the benefit of that is that there's not one party control, right? You've got some inherent checks and balances because you as a Republican are making sure that your Democratic colleague is doing things properly and vice versa.
So two questions.
Sure.
Who are the organizations that are, kind of promoting or encouraging more people to become poll workers? And then two, why is that bad?
Yeah. So to answer the second question first, ultimately, elections administrators that I spoke to all across the country have said it is great that people want to participate. We welcome skeptics. We welcome people who have concerns. They often will come into the process. They will get trained. They will see how difficult the job is, how boring, how iterative, and how many safeguards there are. And they'll come away saying, you know what? I trust our election system. Our system is secure. I gave them too much of a hard time before. So ultimately, participation is great, and I'm not going to say that it's bad. The concern is that the groups that we're seeing recruit, which I'll get to in a second, have a history of sharing false claims, claiming that the election was rigged, that there was fraud around every corner. Of course, a countless number of audits and recounts and nonpartisan, bipartisan, conservative analyses have found that there wasn't any significant amount of widespread fraud powerful enough to sway the election results. In isolated incidents happen, but the election was safe, secure, fair last time around, and they expect it will be this time. But these groups have been recruiting with the message that there was fraud before, the election was stolen, and it might be again, and often sometimes sharing false claims in their actual recruitment. And so the concern is that you get people who are riled up to see fraud around every corner, and then might jump to conclusions. They might misinterpret things as human error or as how the process is supposed to work, and report that out as fraud. And then that just gets into social media and just spins sort of out of control. So the groups that we were looking at, a couple of ones that I want to highlight. The first is a new organization called the Lion of Judah. This is run by a guy named Joshua Caleb Standifer. And for your audience, perhaps more familiar with the Bible, his name is kind of significant and the name of his organization is significant. So your audience might be familiar with Lance Wallnau. He is one of the sort of so Lance Wallnau. Joshua Caleb Standifer has been traveling with Lance Wallnau during the Courage Tours, which is it's a multi-state sort of tent revival MAGA rally mashup, where they've gone to Michigan, Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. And it's been sort of this religious revival that they claim to be nonpartisan, but really is like a get out the vote event for Trump. So the Lion of Judah travels with Wallnau's Courage Tour, which is how I got in touch with them initially. Almost every time that Lance has brought Standifer up onto the stage, he ruminates about his name, Joshua Caleb, and how he must have had a praying mother if he had that name, because in the Bible, both Joshua and Caleb were spies for God. They were sort of infiltrating enemy lines and gathering intel. Standifer has a history as a background as an operation researcher who did some undercover work. His organization has done some undercover work. And at the Courage Tour, he has been recruiting poll workers. And he has used the term that these can be a Trojan horse, which kind of harkens back to the biblical essence of his name. He's been saying, my poll workers who I'm going to recruit can be a Trojan horse. I have talked to voting rights advocates and religious scholars who are really concerned about his use of that term, saying that sounds like you want to kind of go undercover and do something problematic. Standifer has insisted to me that all that means is that it's a way to get sort of principled Christians in the door in places they might not otherwise be.
I should point out, like, I don't know any Christians that use the term Trojan horse to explain what you just said. So that's really ironic, funny.
Yeah, and so he has he's characterized a lot of the criticism and attention he has gotten as anti-Christian bias, which is not something that any of the sources that I spoke to brought up. So no one cares that these folks are Christian, right? Like, we live in a pluralistic democracy with where people of all faiths and persuasions are encouraged and able to participate in the process. No one asks you your religious affiliation when you sign up to be a poll worker. They do ask you your partisan affiliation for the reasons we discussed. But that's not the issue or the concern. The concern is that the Lion of Judah, Joshua Caleb Standifer, shares false claims about election fraud, including videos that have been debunked online when he is on the stage saying, "This is election fraud in real time, folks. This is why you need to participate." And with the message that what happened in 2020 can't happen again. So he's created a course that can sort of helps facilitate people in signing up to become poll workers in their county or municipality with form emails that they can send. And then at the end, it says something like encountering fraud in real time, and directs his recruits to document any concerns of fraud that they encounter and send them along to this external hotline with proof if available. And that's part of the concern. That's the sort of the problematic aspect of this. There are tons of rules, state, federal. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to ask about that, and maybe you were about to talk about it. But I mean, aren't there already existing procedures for poll workers if they do spot something that seems off?
Yeah, so there are really strict and elaborate sort of chains of command and processes that are in place that poll workers will learn about on the ground when they're in training, and then sort of on the ground when they're there. And if they see a concern, they're supposed to raise it to their superior poll worker, often called a chief inspector or something, and they figure it out. And what I've heard from clerks is that many times there are things that people just don't understand. Oh, this is the process. Like, this is why we're doing it this way. This is a statute that lays out why we're supposed to do this. And, you know, legitimate problems get escalated up. A lot of the poll workers and clerks that I spoke to said, please, for the love of God, if you do see something that you're concerned about, don't email the external hotline that, by the way, is connected to Donald Trump. But tell us in the moment so that we can fix it. Because the biggest concern, like the number one priority on election day, is making sure that people are able to vote and that their vote counts. And if you have something that is really concerning and it doesn't get addressed by us in the moment, someone might be disenfranchised. There also are lots of rules, state, federal requirements and whatnot around your ability to record video, audio, or photographs in a polling place. And if you happen to share information that is protected by statute, you could face some serious criminal penalties.
I appreciate you giving us sort of that background on the Lion of Judah. You mentioned another organization was involved as well, but before you talk about that, you said something that caught my attention. You said that this external hotline is connected to Donald Trump. Can you kind of draw that straight line for us?
Yeah. So, Lion of Judah has been super secretive about their funders and their backers, but we did find a business filing. It was like a Tennessee annual corporation filing submitted to the Tennessee Secretary of State for the Lion of Judah that this year identified the attorney who submitted the form as Miles Terry, who Terry has worked with, or Terry's current business partner in his firm is Mark Goldfeder, who I think that's his name. I might be misremembering that, but his law partner at his office is a former personal lawyer of Donald Trump who represented Donald Trump during his first impeachment proceeding. Terry also worked under a man named Jay Sekulow, who runs a different organization, longtime personal lawyer to Donald Trump, also represented Donald Trump during his first impeachment proceeding. So that's sort of the connection there, is not a direct line to Donald Trump, but instead works with people who are in his orbit. It's also worth noting that the website for Lion of Judah prominently features Donald Trump in photographs and quotes from Donald Trump. So it's not like there are photographs of both parties' candidates on the website. Instead, this is the kind of message is like, Donald Trump wants you to do this. Wallnau, too, has said that he could get Donald Trump on the line if he needed to, that he has kind of access to him. He could make a couple of calls. And JD Vance, Trump's vice presidential candidate, candidate, showed up at Wallnau's event at the Courage Tour when I was there in Pennsylvania at the end of September. And Wallnau and Standifer, Lion of Judah, are very closely connected. So it's all sort of in the same orbit, and there's access to the campaign if necessary.
Yeah, that's so wild because, so we recently spoke with a journalist from Mother Jones, Kira Butler, who was, I think, at that rally with Lance Wallnau and the JD Vance thing. So it is. Yeah, it's pretty wild. But what's this other organization that is sort of working either in concert or coordination with Lion of Judah?
Yeah, so there's a couple, two that I will touch on, and sort of just in the same orbit, working around the same thing, but not necessarily together. One is the Election Integrity Network and its various subsidiaries. Election Integrity Network was founded and is run by Cleta Mitchell. Cleta Mitchell was a Trump lawyer in 2020, involved in his efforts to overturn the election, particularly in Georgia. So she was on that call with Trump, if you remember, and the Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, where Trump said, hey, I need you to find this number of votes, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So that's Cleta Mitchell. She now runs a group called the Election Integrity Network that has been also implicated in pushing false claims about the election, stirring up concerns about non-citizen voting when that is already illegal, things like that. Her organization has really pushed recruitment for poll workers or emphasize that you should sign up to be a poll worker since 2022. They seem to be one of the first organizations that really made this pivot from poll watcher to poll worker in the 2022 midterms, and these other groups like Lion of Judah seem to have followed. The other one I want to talk about is True the Vote. True the Vote has been around for quite a long time in Texas, but they too have a history of just sharing false, easily misproven claims. They've been asked by judges to back up their claims in court and then have had to say, actually, judge, we don't have the evidence to do that. If you remember, sort of the infamous documentary or film by Trump ally Dinesh D'Souza, which was called 2000 Mules, which played a significant role in the sort of conspiracy theories around the stolen election, quote unquote. 2000 Mules was kind of at the heart of that. It was the must-see thing. It was the work and contribution of True the Vote that made that documentary. It was all of their claims. That documentary has been roundly debunked. It even was retracted by the publisher, Salem Publishers, or Salem something, because of the false, because that it was totally, it was totally false and had false claims. They had to retract it. So that is True the Vote. And they also claim, just like Election Integrity Network, I'm just concerned in making sure that the elections are free and fair and free of fraud. They are also recruiting poll workers. They have spoken, Catherine Engelbrecht, the director, has spoken on Lance Wallnau show about the need to recruit poll workers, saying, this is one of the most important elections of our lifetimes. If this doesn't go our way, look at what happened in Venezuela. I hope it doesn't get to that. Sort of really kind of extreme rhetoric. And they have created an app called Vote Alert, which they are through which they are soliciting complaints or reports of fraud from poll workers, from poll watchers, from voters, from really anyone. So same sort of tactic as Lion of Judah, saying, if you're a poll worker in the field and you see something, tell us about it so that we can, create a database that that kind of collates all this information. One of the other big things I should add about True the Vote is that the Vote Alert app has a partnership with Mike Lindell, who is one of the most prominent and prolific election deniers and conspiracy theorists in the country. Also, in recent months, has been blaring out anti-Semitic Nazi dog whistles as well. But he's endorsed their efforts as well.
Wow, that's a lot. I mean, I'm sure.
I feel sorry to throw it all out there. It seems a little like that meme of the red string and whatnot.
I know. Well, I mean, it's the first time that I've ever heard, the True the Vote or the Carolyn Engelbrecht person connected to Lance Wallnau. I mean, I've got my own views about each of the organizations, and I remember when the 2000 Mules film came out, we were fortunate enough to have Philip Bump on the show, and we were talking about it because he had like an interview with Dinesh D'Souza, and I encourage our viewers, listeners, to go back and just check out the episode, because he was just making these connections about some of the video, say for instance, that was used in the film was like video purporting, to show cell phone locations. It was just like stock photos. I mean, it was stuff that a layperson like myself could easily just debunk. Be like, hey, yeah, I'm going to go to these Shutterfly, video images that are for free or whatever, and find the exact same stuff. So, anybody that wanted to do a little bit of research could probably figure out that it's not real. But I am curious about the Lance Wallnau, maybe Lions of Judah connection, and kind of the broader outreach to, say, Christians or churches in a lot of these swing states. Like, are you seeing kind of like, because the Lions of Judah has a definite Christian overtone, right? Like, I probably couldn't explain it to you very well because like that's my co-host who I should say does exist. This is the second time we've spoken and you haven't seen him yet, but he does exist. But he handles more of the theological stuff. But knowing that the Lion of Judah is a bit of a weighted term in the Christian community. Like, are they using this to, advocate for churches to become more involved?
Absolutely. So the Lion of Judah says they want to become the Christian version of the NRA. Whatever that means. I mean, I did point out there are quite a few groups that are really well funded and well heeled in the space working in Christian advocacy. But he says that they are going to fill a niche that has not yet been filled. And it is all about messaging to Christians specifically, which is why, in one sense, why when he receives criticism, he says, well, this is just anti-Christian bias, because their whole MO is we're trying to get Christians involved. The experts I speak to say, the concern is not getting Christians involved. The concern is like enticing them with claims of fraud and asking them to do things that are potentially risking legal liability and also pushing false claims. So yeah, the Courage Tour's entire thing through the 5 stops that it's been at, and Lion of Judah was at all of them. I think he's only spoken at 4 of them on stage. But that entire thing is Christians have sort of a religious, spiritual duty to vote their conscience, vote on biblical values. So, a lot of the groups that will speak on stage will have to dance sort of the line of the IRS and say, oh, we're not partisan, we're not endorsing a candidate, but you need to vote these biblical principles, and the choice is clear based on that. And I spoke to Matthew Taylor, who's a scholar who's really gone deep onto Lance Wallnau, and he said that this was like the most elaborate, sophisticated get out the vote mobilization campaign for Christians that he had ever seen. That it really sort of targeted from the stage at various points in various states. Lance Wallnau and his business partner, Mercedes Sparks, have said something to the effect of like, you need to pick one thing to do in addition to voting, whether that's becoming a poll worker, poll watcher, doing a letter writing campaign with My Faith Votes, or making sure that someone else is registered and bringing their ballot back if that's legal. If we haven't encouraged you to get involved, then we have failed. And a lot of the messaging has emphasized that there are a number of Christians who just don't vote and they've said sort of from the stage that that's sort of a dereliction of your Christian duty. You really need to be involved. And it's cast as sort of a spiritual war or battle to save the nation.
Wow. So I'm glad that you got a chance to talk to Matt. I mean, he's super smart on this kind of stuff. And I always joke with him because he's sort of like an unwitting Seth Rogen cosplayer. But I am curious though, in your reporting, you mentioned, okay, there's this big get out the vote effort. There's a big election integrity effort. Is there also like any effort to recast who Trump is in the eyes of Christians? Because, I mean, I hang around a lot of Christians as sort of my circle. And, I've spoken to a number that are still holding their nose to kind of vote for Trump. So, I mean, were you sensing any of that in your reporting and, when you're out and about talking to people?
Yeah. So, when I was at the Courage Tour, these people did not need to hold their nose. These people were all in on Trump. And it really, it could have been a MAGA rally. Like, there was Trump stuff outside. People were wearing Trump 2024 shoes, Make America Great Again hats, lots of shirts with the photograph of him after the first assassination attempt. Like, these people were all in on Trump. The one thing I do want to mention is that Lance Wallnau in particular is, according to Matt, one of the reasons why why Christians and conservative evangelical Christians in particular did coalesce around Trump initially in 2016. And this was through the Cyrus anointing, where Lance Wallnau came out with a prophecy in Charisma News in October of 2024, not this month, 4 years ago, or 8 years ago now. Oh my gosh, 8 years ago now in October of 2016. We've all aged. And he came out with this op-ed that said, basically, I went to meet with Donald Trump at Trump Tower. And afterwards, God spoke to me, told me to read Isaiah 45. And I realized that Trump was a Cyrus figure. King Cyrus, heathen Persian emperor, who was responsible for sort of saving the Jews and bringing them out of exile, even though he himself was not Jewish. And this was sort of the theological metaphor that Lance Wallnau used to pitch Trump's candidacy to Christians, saying, look, we know he's got this past, twice divorced, had extramarital affairs, lots of problems in business, credibly accused of sexual assault, bragged about sexual assault. All of these things are antithetical, we would expect, to conservative evangelical values. But he's a Cyrus figure. Trump, or I heard God speak to me and said that he is like King Cyrus, that he has been chosen by God to sort of restore Christians to political, social, cultural power. And in Matthew Taylor's telling, that was sort of one of the big things that helped people get in line behind Trump in 2016, and that mythos sort of has only grown. And over time on the stage in the Courage Tour and Lance Wallnau's many podcasts and appearances, he will kind of echo that, saying that God has chosen Donald Trump to be president. And his contender, Vice President Kamala Harris, has the spirit of Jezebel, or she is the devil's choice. So I think framing it in those terms also, if the choice is between someone who isn't, who you might not agree with, you might need to plug your nose, but the other choice is someone who's the devil's choice, like that, to me, makes it easier, even if you haven't necessarily made Trump more palatable, just to other folks. But certainly we're in the places where I was, they were all in.
Yeah. So talk to me about like the training operation. I mean, is it more like, sort of, hey, here's something that's good to know when you're a poll worker, or is this like a well-run, organized, sort of like training effort?
It's more of the former, honestly. A lot of it is, so Lion of Judah, they do have a 15-minute free course that he claims is a training. I mean, to be honest, it's not really that. Really what it does is it tells you the basic requirements of being a poll worker, and then it helps you sign up where you need to be, which is a really important intervention, frankly, because you can only be a poll worker if you sign up through your municipality. So directing people directly to where they need to go, to their municipality or county, is really important in sort of connecting the funnel and making sure that people actually are poll workers. We have we did obtain recordings of trainings related to election integrity network in states like Wisconsin and in North Carolina and Georgia. And these were a little bit more detailed. The Georgia one was actually quite detailed about these are the rules. This is what the day might look like, blah, blah, blah. But all of them emphasized, as an actual poll worker, you're going to need to get training from the place where you are hired, like from the actual government. And so whatever they give is supplemental. Ultimately, you're not going to be able to be a poll worker until you get trained by the government. The thing that is sort of distinct that we were trying to pull out in these is that part of the training or the message, as I mentioned, the Line of Judas was pretty sparse. It was more connecting people to where they need to go to sign up. But they did emphasize, if you see fraud, tell us. And that was sort of the distinct piece, was not training them to be a poll worker in any particular way. True the Vote, Line of Judah, EIN, all of them say, look, as a poll worker, you need to follow the law. You want to uphold the integrity of elections, blah, blah, blah. The distinct piece is them saying, by the way, if you see something, tell us. Like, don't go, maybe don't go to your polling place authorities, or they should be a second option, a second line of resort. Your first instinct should be to report this outside to us. And the concern from people that I've spoken to is that, we've seen how this goes, right? You mentioned with 2000 Mules, there was stuff that was easily disprovable. Just, you could just debunk these photos, and yet incredibly durable and sticky. It's much harder to sort of correct a falsehood than it is to share that falsehood out there. So the concern is that with these reports, it's going to be a lot of noise, a lot of sort of bunk and misleading stuff that will get picked up by people who are really good at spreading messages far and wide, whether or not they're true or not. And that erodes distrust, stirs people up, maybe even potentially gets people to a point where we saw on January 6, 2021.
What's the scale, I guess, of this operation? I mean, is it like a few dozen people, kind of spread out across the United States, or, would you say that the number of people that have either probably been reached, is a matter of worry for election officials?
It's really hard to know. What I can tell you is that myself and my colleagues at ProPublica contacted over a dozen. I mean, we contacted close to 36 counties, or officials in counties and municipalities in 9 swing states, I believe, where they were focused to say, have you seen anything like this? And the problem is they're not required to disclose who. I mean, it's a problem for us in reporting. It's not a problem sort of typically. But when you sign up to be a poll worker, you're not required to disclose if you were sent by Line of Judah or True the Vote. So there's no way of really knowing. So we asked a ton of people if they had seen anything like this. They hadn't said anything. I was able to find one person in Wisconsin who signed up through Line of Judah and was in fact a poll worker in Eau Claire. He had also already been a poll worker before and had been a great poll worker before. So, that's who's to sort of say about that. I did speak at length with Josh Standifer of the Line of Judah. He told me that thousands of people had gone through his program. He would not disclose to me how many of those have actually signed up to become poll workers, because I have also gone through his training. So, right. And I'm sure there are other journalists and sort of activists or lawyers who have gone through the training just to see what it looks like. So certainly some number of that are not people who would actually sign up to be poll workers. But he says that's thousands. So it's hard to say. And I really do want to emphasize the elections administrators that I spoke to across the country all said our elections are secure. We have iterative processes in place. No individual poll worker who is a temporary employee is going to be able to do anything on their own without some oversight. Like, that there are just tons of checks and balances in place, and they are not concerned about a rogue poll worker getting in there and being able to wreak havoc. There's been isolated instances of people doing inappropriate things, and they have been swiftly caught and prosecuted. So that is not really the concern. And they do want to say, like, your vote is secure and this will be okay. For however many people who are in there with an issue or with suspicions, there are going to be more people who are in there doing their jobs as they should be. If they see something fishy, if they see people who aren't really doing what they're supposed to be, they will be roundly kicked out. So the larger concern is instead this court of public opinion sort of misinformation.
Based on everything that you've said so far, I'm not getting the sense that any laws have been broken at this stage. But like, what are you hearing from law enforcement officials about, I don't know, this type of activity, or is it not even on their radar?
Honest, we didn't talk to law enforcement about this because we spoke to lawyers. We spoke to lots of lawyers to say, hey, is anything amiss here? And they said, that ultimately, the what could violate the law, depending on how someone follows through, is if a poll worker photographs or documents information that is protected by state statute and shares that out. Actually, in some places around the country, there are ordinances and also potentially criminal penalties, depending, for poll workers who spread misinformation. So potentially that could be something, depending on what they do. But yeah, at this point, no laws have been broken. And in fact, the True the Vote's website, their Vote Alert app, there's a disclaimer when you first sign up that says basically state and federal law might preclude you from taking photographs or recording in a polling place. By checking on to this, you agree to follow the law. So they're kind of like wiping their hands of anything and saying, like, we told you this could be risky. So it's all just, sort of wait and see on election day.
I gotcha. So I know that you are working on another story, or just worked on another story with another previous guest of ours, Andy Kroll. I know that wasn't necessarily the context of why you came here today, but I'd love for you just to give us a little bit of a preview, and I'll make sure I put the story in our notes too, because it is somewhat related.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was about by hosting JD Vance at the Courage Tour, Lance Wallnau's 501c3, as well as the 501c3 called Ziklag, which is sort of a funding arm that is funding the Courage Tour. Both of those may have violated tax law and elections law. I'm more versed on the tax law part of it. But the gist of that there is 501c3 charities, they get tax breaks. They're not supposed to be interfering or intervening in elections, either directly or indirectly. And the Trump campaign very much billed this JD Vance appearance as an official campaign stop that was happening sort of at the Courage Tour. And I was there on the ground when this happened. So I got to see JD Vance in person at the Courage Tour. And so I was able to see the sort of delicate dance that Lance Wallnau's team was doing to try to delineate between the nonprofit Lance Wallnau Ministries that hosted the Courage Tour versus the for-profit podcast, which hosted JD Vance's appearance, that was on the same stage in the same venue. People could stay in their same seats and they would transition seamlessly into the Courage Tour activities afterwards. They were trying to say, well, the actual event, this is put on by the podcast, sandwiched in between these other things. So it was really kind of messy. And, the IRS hasn't been particularly aggressive in enforcing these laws in recent decades, frankly. But they still are aware that it's an issue. Like, Lance kind of slipped up at one point later in the day, and Mercedes Sparks, his I think VP of operations, sort of peeked out from behind a curtain to say, he didn't come to the Courage Tour. The podcast hosted that event. They were very separate. I don't need the IRS coming for me. So we get into that sort of the difference there and why that potentially runs afoul of the law. I think sort of recognizing that the IRS probably isn't going to do anything, but it's still important to note, particularly because the goal of the Trump administration, should they assume office again, is to water that down and or possibly remove those protections completely. So Trump has spoken about possibly repealing the Johnson Amendment, which prevents churches from getting involved in political activity. Someone asked JD Vance on stage, what are you going to do to protect us, churches who are getting in trouble for potentially risking our nonprofit status by being politically involved? JD Vance said that he would promise that, that no church would be stripped of its status, that they were going to protect the free speech of churches. of course, churches can have free speech. It's just that if they don't want to be taxed, they can't advocate for candidates. So that was sort of what we got into there, and was a fun sort of additional follow up to the Courage Tour, because a lot has been happening at those events.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for coming back on our show, Phoebe. This is really, really educational for me, and I hope it is for our audience as well. Yeah. So I guess what's next for you in your investigative stuff? Or are you going to take a breather before the election? Because all hell's going to break loose after November 5th.
I need to take a break before the election. I'm supposed to be on vacation today, but instead I pitched another story that I'm working on. We have a story coming out about some stuff on certification. And then actually I have a big, beautiful visual explainer sort of about how we got to this moment politically, religiously, and sort of unpacking this Christian nationalism term that people use, and showing like how it evolved from certain movements and people and goals. So that will hopefully be out this next week.
Well, awesome. And thanks again for stopping by and talking with us. And we'd love to have you back on once you get the story out and about, and maybe you'll eventually finally get to meet my co-host. Who knows? So thank you so much for your time, and thank you to our audience. And as always, make sure you keep your conversations not right or left, but up, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Hey there, Josh Bertram here, faithful host of the Faithful Politics Podcast. I want to let you know about a compelling new spinoff, the Faith Roundtable, where I'll be interviewing top faith leaders, theologians, and scholars to unpack the pressing issues that are shaping the church in America today. We'll dive into topics like faith in public life, social justice, and how we can engage our communities more effectively. Make sure you don't miss any of our enlightening conversations by subscribing to it on our YouTube channel. Join me at the Faith Roundtable, where deep discussion meets thoughtful insight.